Hey friends, Elizabeth here from Plant-Based Bride, back again with another video, and today I'm going to be sharing with you the books that I read in February for Black History Month. I'm trying something a little different this time around for my wrap-up video instead of having you look at my face the whole time. I thought it might be fun to tell you about the books as I create the entries for them in my reading journal. So please let me know in a comment if you enjoy this style. Do you prefer this over the way that I've done wrap-ups in the past, just showing my face? Do you like both? I am definitely open to mixing it up and sometimes doing it one way, sometimes doing it another, depending on the video and what I feel serves it better. But let me know your thoughts. Like this video if you enjoy this style. But yeah, I just thought it might be fun to try something a little different, so that's what we're doing this time around. So in this video, I'm just going to be focusing on the books that I read in February written by Black authors. I did read a couple books written by non-Black authors, and if you're curious what I read and what I thought about them, as always, you can follow me on Goodreads or add me as a friend on Goodreads. The link is in the description box, and that way you can see my thoughts as I'm reading. You can see what I'm reading at any given time, be the first to see my reviews, all of that good stuff. So I am so low on tea stained paper. I feel like I've mentioned this a couple times recently, but I just keep using those scraps. I have not had time to tea stain any new paper recently. I feel like everything is hectic in my life right now. So I'm just finding pieces in my box of scrap paper to use spread after spread, but the pickings are getting slim at this point, so I really need to tea stain some more paper. I'm switching up how I'm doing my reading journal just a little bit this year, in that I am writing an entry for every single book I finish, not just the ones that I give 5 stars or that I really love, because there are definitely some books that I read in 2021 that I didn't give 5 stars to, but have really stuck with me, and I kind of wish that I had an entry in my reading journal for them. So I decided that I was just going to do an entry for every single book, but to try to mitigate the extra work that would entail, I am adjusting the size of my entry based on my rating of the book. So I'm trying to stick to a single page, even for books that I really loved, and then making my entries smaller and smaller depending on how I rated them. Favorite books I really loved, get a full page. Books that were 3 to 4 stars that I have more to write about are going to get a half page. And then 3 stars that I have a little less to say about are going to get a quarter page. And then 2 and 1 stars, I'm going to try to stick to a quarter page as well, just so that I don't fill my reading journal with too much negativity, because as you'll know, sometimes I can get carried away ranting about books that I didn't enjoy. And while I know some of you find that entertaining, I don't want to overwhelm my reading journal with a bunch of entries about books I didn't like, so I'm going to try to keep those ones small. I'm starting by creating this little header area in the top left-hand corner, and I had this abstract artwork of a Black woman that I'd printed out to potentially use in an entry last year, and I still had it in my reading journal box of paper and pictures and washi tape, and I really love this piece of art, and I thought it would be really nice here as part of this header. So I cut out this lady and one of the monstera leaves, and then cut out the other 2 to put on the other side, cut out a moth, and used a couple stickers and my stamps and some washi tape to kind of pull together this little header area. The first 3 books I'm going to talk about in this video are Ties That Tether, No Gods, No Monsters, and The City We Became. So I've printed out the book covers of all 3 of these, and I'm going to glue those down. And then for No Gods, No Monsters and The City We Became, I printed out 1 image each to add a little bit more detail to the entry, so I'm gluing those down as well. And I've had people ask how I find images to put for each book. The book cover images I just get from Goodreads. I save them to my computer from Goodreads and put them in Photoshop to make sure they're all the same size. For people who ask me what size my book covers are, they're approximately 1 inch on the shorter side and 1.5 inch on the longer side. If that helps you, of course, your preference for the size of book covers in your journal might be different, especially if your journal is smaller than mine, I'm using a square notebook from Archer and Olive that's 8 inches by 8 inches. I'm starting with my entry for Ties That Tether by Jane Igharo, and I gave this book 3 stars. I was really excited to read this one. It is a romance novel written by an author who was born in Nigeria but then moved to Canada. And the protagonist of this romance is in a similar position where she was born and grew up for the first 12 years of her life, I believe, in Nigeria. And then her family moved to Canada and she finished her growing up years in Canada and is now living there as an adult and working and looking for love. This book was very much sold as a romance that had this subplot of coming to terms with your culture, figuring out who you are when you are of 2 separate, very different cultures, and how do you honor where you came from while still fitting in where you live in the present. And I find that really fascinating, and I think it's an important concept to be explored more in books, because for so long I feel like those experiences weren't being represented in literature, and it's really nice to read those stories and to know that people are hopefully feeling seen by these characters and by these stories. I was really looking forward to reading this, and I do feel that in that way this book did a great job. I think the way that it talked about Nigerian culture and how it explored the protagonist's feelings about her culture, her 2 disparate cultures, and what it meant to honor her Nigerian roots and her father who had passed away, while still honoring herself and honoring the amalgamation that she is of Nigerian and Canadian culture. I loved how that was addressed. I loved learning more about Nigerian culture. For me, the sticking point was the romance. I honestly would have loved if this book just didn't have romance at all. The romance just fell flat. I felt that the characters didn't really have any chemistry. The love interest, Raphael, didn't have a lot of personality. He felt very one-dimensional. And he even had point of view chapters, but they were just so short and felt so surface level that they almost took away from the story for me. This book also has a trope that I really dislike that comes in right at the start and was not included in any of the marketing material that I saw anyway. This book, pretty much right at the beginning, has an unexpected pregnancy, and the whole book, that is the central conflict, is the main character being pregnant unexpectedly and having to deal with the fallout and decide what to do. I personally don't love this trope, and I don't really love reading about pregnancy very much, to be honest. So for me, that was a big drawback. And then the fact that the romance just in general felt pretty bland and unrealistic in a lot of ways brought my enjoyment of this book down quite a bit. I will say that the main character's mother is treated as the villain of this story, and I did see some own voices reviewers bringing that up as a point of concern about how this Nigerian mother was being represented, especially for a book that may be someone's first point of reference for Nigerian culture and Nigerian people. To have sort of the most Nigerian character in this story, or the person who was most attached to maintaining Nigerian culture and values in her life and the life of her family, being demonized and treated like a villain, that might be off-putting to you reading this. And I definitely felt kind of weird about it, although of course it's not my experience and I can't say if it's an accurate representation or an accurate experience because I have not had that experience. Okay, moving on to the next book, which was No Gods, No Monsters by Caldwell Turnbull. This book I had as an advanced audio copy from NetGalley, so I listened to it on audiobook, and I have to be honest, I was initially drawn to this book and this author simply because his last name is Turnbull, because my last name is Turnbull, and it's not like it's a rare name necessarily, but it's not super common. I don't see a lot of people named Turnbull out and about doing stuff, so I was excited that someone had my last name. And the more that I read about the books that Caldwell Turnbull writes, the more I thought, this author actually sounds right up my alley. So I was excited to finally dive in and read one of his books. And I must say, I have so many varying feelings about this book. First of all, I guess I should start by explaining what this book is. So this is an urban fantasy where monsters of various kinds, so werewolves, people who can make themselves invisible or essentially leave their physical form, and various other types of monsters have existed for who knows how long, but were hiding hiding from the rest of society, and one day they just come out and reveal themselves. And this book sort of follows various characters throughout the fallout of this as the general public has become aware of their presence, of their existence, and what it means for these various monsters in their individual lives. And the story is very much told as a series of vignettes. There are a lot of characters to keep track of, which made it a little confusing for me, a little hard to follow, especially in an audiobook. And it definitely doesn't feel particularly linear. There's not a huge overarching plot. It really does feel like those little vignettes where you get a couple moments here and a couple moments there, little snippets of different monsters' lives and what they're going through. And each one felt very interesting to me. I was definitely hooked and intrigued. I really enjoyed the writing style, and I thought it was a really clever and unique concept. But like I said, I did find it a little confusing, and it definitely hopped around a little quicker than I could sort of get my bearings in any particular vignette. It was very interesting, and I'm definitely planning on reading the next book because I believe this is intended to be a series. And I do want to read more written by this author because he does remind me quite a bit of N.K. Jemisin, who is one of my favorite authors of all time. So any more authors that give me that kind of vibe of weird and unique sci-fi fantasy that really leans into exploring deeper, more serious issues through this genre, I am on board with. So I'm going to keep reading, but I'm hesitant to unequivocally recommend this book to everyone because I don't think everyone is going to love it. Here's what I'll say. I know a lot of people also feel this way about N.K. Jemisin. They find her books confusing and hard to follow. If you've read N.K. Jemisin's work and you feel that way about it, where it's just a little too confusing for you or hard to follow, you don't really love the weirdness of it, then I would not recommend at least this book by Caldwell Turnbull. I haven't read any of his other books, so I don't know if they're similar in that way, but I wouldn't recommend this book in that case. But if you are a fan of N.K. Jemisin or other authors that I would kind of put in a similar category like Rivers Solomon, who I'm going to talk about a little later in this video, then I would recommend checking this out because I think you would like it. So, yeah. Moving on to the next book, which is The City We Became by N.K. Jemisin. And if you know me, if you've watched any of my book-related videos, you probably know what's coming. But I gave this 5 stars, and I'm in love with it. It's such a good book. And I continue to think that N.K. Jemisin is a genius, and I want to read everything she's ever written for all of time. So, this book, how do you even describe it? This is a hard book to talk about without spoiling things, and I really feel like it's one that's better to go into without too much foreknowledge. So all I will say is that this is a book about New York City and the people who inhabit it and the issues that they face and the living, breathing thing that is New York and all of its boroughs and how they interact and what happens when this incredible city that is home to so many individual human beings is put at risk by outside forces. And it's sort of a sci-fi fantasy take where we've got things happening that don't necessarily make any sense. So that's how I'll describe it. I thought this was amazing. I loved it. It is so unique and strange, and yet it just works perfectly, which could just be a description of anything I've ever read by N.K. Jemisin. We have a very diverse, varied group of protagonists that we follow. They all feel so real. They jump off the page. They are flawed and badass in their own ways, and I loved their interactions. The villain was terrifying and also a really clever commentary. And this book just in general does a great job of tying together these really cool sort of sci-fi elements with social commentary on really important issues to New Yorkers like gentrification, racism, colonization, wage disparities, sex and gender and sexuality, so many things. This is an incredibly layered book, and it is quite complex. So just keep that in mind going into it. You might need to expend a little more brain power to follow what's happening, but it's also really easy to read. It's really high stakes and exciting and fast paced. It's fun. It's funny. It's just so good. So I highly recommend. If you haven't read any N.K. Jemisin, what are you waiting for? I'm going to keep recommending her till the end of time. This book is great. The Broken Earth trilogy is great. It feels a little more like a fantasy, whereas The City We Became feels a little more on the sci-fi side of things. But I feel like when it comes to N.K. Jemisin, she really melds those two genres together because it's not quite science, but it's not quite magic. Sort of something in between. I really like that about her writing. Flipping over to my next spread, where I'm going to create 3 more entries. So the 3 books on this spread are going to be Sorrowland by Rivers Solomon, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings by Maya Angelou, and The Undertakers by Nicole Glover. So Sorrowland by Rivers Solomon is a contemporary fantasy in a similar vein to N.K. Jemisin. I would definitely put Rivers Solomon and N.K. Jemisin into the same category of sci-fi fantasy authors that approach the genre through a much more realistic lens, using sci-fi fantasy as a way to create social commentary and also just having a very weird or unique take on the genre, which I personally love. So this is another one that's kind of hard to describe without giving away too much, but I will say that this is a story that focuses on Vern, who is our protagonist, who at the beginning of the novel is pregnant and has escaped from a cult that she's lived in her entire life out to the woods, and she gives birth to her twin children in the woods, and this follows her story as she undergoes a transformation both internally and externally as she learns to be a mother and learns who she is outside of this cult and has this sort of magical or possibly scientific physical transformation at the same time. This book explores racism, misogyny, colonization, religion, identity, motherhood, and queerness in such a raw way, and I loved Vern. She is very complex, incredibly flawed, but I couldn't help but root for her, and I really loved following her story. I also loved her twin children, Howling and Feral. They brought so much joy to this story, this wholesome, loving silliness that I think the story needed, and I just found myself beaming every time there were scenes with them. I just found them so endearing, and I really loved following this story. I'm a big fan of Rivers Solomon. They are one of my favorite authors, and I loved this book. So, highly recommend. Moving on to I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings by Maya Angelou. This is the first of several memoirs that Maya Angelou penned in her life, and this one focuses on her young life from childhood through to her teenage years. And this is a really beautifully written book. It is very poetic at times. I would say it almost reads like lyrics to a song, but it also really is an unflinching look at Maya Angelou's childhood and some of the abuse that she suffered, which is told in a very blunt way that I know has caused some people to be very upset by this book, or, not thinking that it should be taught in schools or that children should be reading it. It's definitely difficult to read. I felt just a deep sense of unease, of just extreme discomfort reading those sections, but I also think it's important for children to see this kind of behavior for what it is, because you can see through Maya Angelou's own experience that she did not know that what this man was doing to her was wrong, and she had all these confusing and conflicting feelings about it, and she didn't know that she could say no, and she didn't really understand what was happening. And I just wish that children were taught from a very early age what is okay and what isn't, and how to know when someone is taking advantage of you, and to know that they are safe to go to someone for help if something like that is happening to them. It was definitely very emotional, very hard to read at times, but there was also sort of this levity to it. It very much felt like Maya Angelou was confiding in the reader in sort of a joyful way at times, and just this bouncing between stories and between feelings that we often have as children, this emotional reactivity, I guess, or the resilience of children, where you just kind of bounce back from things and hop from one thing to another. And it definitely had that feeling as well. It was a very emotional and vivid read. The last book that I finished in February, written by a Black author, was The Undertakers by Nicole Glover. And this is the second book in a series that she's writing that is sort of an amalgamation of 3 different genres. So I'd say it's like fantasy because there's magic, historical fiction because of the setting of the story, the time and place, and then it's also a cozy mystery because in each book, Hetty, the protagonist, and her husband Benji are solving a mystery together. So I loved the first book in this series. I loved the conductors. I thought it was so good. I loved the characters. I loved the diversity of the characters. There's quite a bit of LGBTQIA plus representation despite when this is set. We also have a bit of a slow burn, gentle romance subplot between Hetty and her husband. They had a marriage not based on love, and you kind of slowly see them fall in love for real. And it's really, really sweet. I also love the magic system. It's really unique and really, really cool. And in the first book, I loved the mystery. I was really drawn in. I was trying to solve it. I felt the stakes and I really wanted to see Hetty and Benji succeed. I had really high hopes for the second book in the series, and sadly it didn't quite live up to the first one. Now, it still had a lot of the things that I loved about the first one, but for me in the second book, the mystery just didn't quite come through the way it did in the first book. I wasn't as interested in the mystery. It didn't feel like the stakes were as high, and the reveal sort of didn't do anything for me. I just wasn't as invested in the mystery part of it. So I'm really hoping that if Nicole Glover's continuing with the series, that she'll bring back that amazing mystery aspect from the first one, because everything else is still there. I give it 4 stars because I still really enjoyed the process of reading this, but I was sad that the mystery wasn't quite as gripping as it was in the first book. Also, I just wanted to show you my copy of The City We Became so you could see how many tabs I used, because this book is a goldmine. So those are the 6 books that I finished in February, but I am in the midst of reading a couple more that I haven't quite finished, and I didn't want to rush myself through finishing them just for this video. I'm currently reading Their Eyes Were Watching God by Zora Neale Hurston. So far, I'm loving it. I love the writing style. It's so beautifully written. Oh my goodness, I keep tabbing pages even though it's a library book. And I have 15 Dogs by Andre Alexis, which I'm about halfway through, and so far I'm kind of on the fence about it. I like parts of it. There are parts of it that I'm not sure that I'm a fan of, and it's pretty violent, so you'll have to add me as a friend on Goodreads to see my final thoughts on that one. I have also just started The Other Black Girl by Zakiya Delilah Harris, and so far I'm struggling to get into it. I'm not loving the narrator, so we'll see if I'm able to get into it enough to finish it in the next week. I also have The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison from the library, and I'm hoping to read that in the next week before I return it, so we'll see if I can get to it. Again, if you go add me as a friend on Goodreads, you can see my progress. And if you follow me on Instagram, you will have already seen this little haul that I did because I went to the bookstore after I went to the library. But if you don't, here are some of the other books I have written by Black authors that I'm hoping to get to in the next couple of months or so. So you should see these kind of scattered amongst my Goodreads reviews and in my videos. Very excited for all of these. Before I finish this video, I did want to share some books that I've read written by Black authors in the past that I also wanted to recommend as part of this video. If you are trying to read more work written by Black authors, check some of these out. Hopefully some of these will appeal to you. I also wanted to pop up the book cards for the 6 books that I talked about in this video because I like to share this information in one easy to read place along with all the trigger and content warnings. So I wanted to put those here as well. Again, if you enjoyed this video, give it a like and subscribe, of course, if you haven't already. Let me know in the comments down below if you enjoyed this format. Do you prefer watching me set up my reading journal while I talk about these books, or do you prefer seeing my expressive face while I talk about them? Let me know. I'm very curious to hear if people are more a fan of this style, the other style. Maybe I'll alternate between them or something. We shall see. Also, leave a book emoji in the comments if you made it all the way to the end so I know you're a real one. I want to take a quick second to thank my patrons for their support. Extra special thanks to our newest patrons, Catherine, Kimberly, Moonrock, Katrin, Melissa, Blessin, and Daphne. Welcome all of you to the squad. We are so excited to have you. If you at home want to join the squad, feel free. There's there's a link in the card and in the description box down below. And with that, I'm gonna get going. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I'll see you really soon in my next one. Bye, friends.